So yeah, this is going to be a tag team presentation, and I'm going to start out talking about BioEddie, which is our tool for depicting biological entities. BioEddie is a web app, and you can use simple drag and drop technology to pull components over here and to quickly build up biomolecules. One of the key underpinnings of BioEddie is that not only does it have this ability to string together components, but it also has built-in chemical intelligence. So you can move seamlessly between the biological world where you're dealing with sequences to the chemical world. And so you're starting inputs. You can either draw things from scratch, or you can import mol files or Helm files. You can type in amino acid sequences or import oligonucleotide sequences. So you can start from all of these, and we have the ability to save these both as mol or as Helm format, where you can get the sequences plus the additional annotations that go along with that. In addition to that, one of the key features of BioEddie is that we have the ability to have to represent parts of your entities that are not characterizable. If you have some sort of polymeric support that you want to show there, or if you have something, if you're working with nanoparticles, we have ways of putting those pieces in there too, so that you can represent that and still communicate what you have. And we have a lot of different levels of annotation. So it's not just an image that says polymer, but then underneath that, you can also have information about, say, the molecular weight range of that polymer, some of the features of that. And we have annotations built in that you can do both at the component level and at the entire macromolecule level. So just looking a little bit more at what we can do here. The basic components of BioEddie are that we have the canvas, which is where you're creating your structures, the library. BioEddie comes with a built-in monomer library, but you're able to add your own components to that, so you can add your special non-natural amino acids, or your chemical linkers, or your end groups, or the special types of polymeric supports that you're adding. You all have the ability to add that over here to the different library panes. And then finally at the bottom, we have the ability to move between the Helm world and the details view, where you can get a little bit more of the chemical information. And so we can toggle again back and forth between more of a sequence-based view and more of a chemical structure view. And just to sort of do a quick survey of the different components, we have quite a variety of amino acids built in, and you can add your own amino acids here. You can add in various chemistry capping groups or linkers as you need to put them in here. For nucleic acids, you can do not only bases, but also unique linkers and also modified sugars. And so you have the ability to really get very granular with the different pieces that you're putting into your biomolecule. And finally, of course, you have the ability to add in just what we call blobs. These are your uncharacterizable pieces, your pieces that you want to indicate that, I've got some sort of polyethylene glycol group there. You can look at the annotations underneath to learn more about that, but then you can just put that out there and include that in the structures that you're drawing. Again, we have the ability to get sort of inline chemistry here, so you can get a little bit more detail about the pieces that you're drawing in here. You can always hover over the components of your library to get a little bit more information about what's there. and and you can switch back and forth between this Helm sort of view, the sequence-based view, and also get the chemistry details. And finally, when you're selecting a piece of your structure, you can look down in the Helm viewer and get some selection highlights down here. You can also look at the individual bonds, and in this case, this is PMX 205, which is a C5a antagonist. It has sort of an unusual cyclic structure with this bond between ornithine and arginine coming off of the ornithine side chain and the arginine carbonyl group. And just by clicking on the bond, you can see these details down here in the details section. So what can you do with it? Well, you know, you can not only do simple peptides, you can do sort of funkier things. There were some recent papers about the synthesis of the death cap mushroom toxins. This is beta amanitin. These have really kind of cool looking structures. They are bicyclic octopeptides, and we can represent these in BioEddie quite simply. They're actually a related family of these toxins, and so you can look at all of them. And in the view over here, we have sort of a sequence-based view. I've collapsed the not-so-interesting glycine, isoleucine, glycine side chain that's constant in all of these. And then we can just sort of focus on the other parts of the sequences. And just doing a quick visual scan, you can see that all of the action is happening in here at amino acids 5 and 7. And again, we're looking at these as sequences, but you can export them as mol files or as SD files, and then do operations on them as chemical structures. So. And so this is sort of a visual alignment that you can do with it in the Biomolecule Toolkit that Roland's going to talk about in a minute. We actually have a real alignment endpoint, but this is just a way for you to sort of visually scan different biomolecules. Of course, we can also do oligonucleotides, and as I mentioned, we have the ability to have not only the natural components, but also substitutions at the base level, at the linker level, and at the sugar level. And not only that, but we can support things such as PMOs, where you have an entirely different backbone, where you don't really have the sugar or the standard phosphodiester bond, but instead you have those morpholino linkers. And so we have the ability to put these in here too, and represent a variety of different types of oligonucleotides and antisense chemistries. So I think that's about where I'm going to take it. So that's just a quick overview of biomolecule registration. Once you have it in your system, the more interesting things happen. And Roland is going to talk to you about how to do that with the Biomolecule Toolkit.
What you've seen, essentially, to put it in context, is a drawing tool that is very much like Marvin.js, just for larger modalities. And it really works from the very small ones, as you've seen, peptides, oligonucleotides. We can scale up to proteins, antibodies, antibody-drug conjugates, and so forth. And the question's going to be, now, you can nicely visualize them, you can draw them, or what do you do if you have a set of those? And for this, we have developed a tool that essentially covers a similar functional space as JChem-Base does for small molecules. We call that the Biomolecule Toolkit. And essentially, it's a platform toolkit that manages larger sets of these biomolecules in a database and has a couple of additional feats that you'd expect from a tool like that in order to standardize those, in order to do certain operations on these. The main point is it's accessible from both a Java API and a RESTful web service API. It provides you with a database layer in order to deposit these things into a database. Obviously then coming with a search endpoint that lets you find specific sets of molecules within your repository, either based on chemical queries, say substructure queries, or sequence-based queries where you're looking for specific sequence motifs. But also, since you're able to deposit these molecules together with additional metadata, we also have filters that kind of bring back results based on these metadata. One of the kind of key features, I would say, that's distinguished this from other sorts of more bioinformatics-based things is the capability of link this directly live to chemistry. So whether you start off from a plain chemical structure file, we would be able to actually identify what's the sequence beneath that structure without it being explicitly annotated in that corresponding molecule. And of course, vice versa, that's the rather easier way. If you have a sequence based on the chemical information that we have in our monomer library, you're able to produce a chemical structure of these modalities. What I'm going to talk about next is just a few highlights of what we have added as capabilities into the Biomolecule Toolkit over the last 2 years. And one of the aspects is all around similarity-based searching. We've got some sequence motive-based searches already available for a very long time, subsequence-based searching. Now we have been adding something that we term as distance-based similarity search. Essentially, it's meaning that if you have a query sequence and you're looking at a target sequence, you can count the number of modifications or the number of editing steps you have to go through in order to reach from your query sequence to the target sequence. And once you put in a threshold and say, I'm only interested in the ones that you can reach within max, say 3 steps from my query sequence, that would give you back the result set of molecules that match this condition. I'll explain a little bit later on why we actually have implemented that. But the second part, that's something more familiar to biologists in general, is a plain, say, similarity scoring. We say we're using the NCBI BLAST libraries in order to identify from a query sequence what are the most similar target sequences in my database and which molecules do contain those. The other bit of that, now that we've talked about the similarity based on the edit distance, is when you're doing peptide design, very often what you're looking at is a single sequence, and then you might have information about where are the active positions or the active sites of that given sequence. And if you're kind of happy with the activity, but you would like to still tune it a little further, you might want to pick a couple of possible modifications, just enumerate those in order to get through a set of peptides that you could make, run some in silico assessments, and then finally end up with a set of peptides that you're actually going to make. Most of this is particularly monomer-based, and one variation of the theme is just providing a pure alanine scan in order to get to the information, like where are my active sites, followed by an exhaustive enumeration of, say, residue replacements, where you can go in and say, and this is my list of potential peptides I'd like to make and measure in biological experiments further down the road. Now, you might wonder, so how are these tools together that are pretty raw actually used by our customers? And I think I'm going to give you kind of 3 examples here that are quite diverse in terms of application. The first one is work that we've done together with a customer in the United Kingdom, Heptares. They are developing small molecules as well as therapeutic peptides. And they approached us and said, we have a challenge that we are using a registration system that registers peptides as chemical structures. And we have a kind of policy that whenever a peptide chemist draws one of these structures, he should attach as an annotation the actual sequence that he has meant to produce. And 1-2 years after they have kind of introduced this policy, they started looking at quality issues, saying that it was not often the case that the sequence they'd had attached did actually match what was drawn in the structure itself. And that created a discrepancy they need to get rid of. So what they've done is they took our toolkit, started to essentially dig through their molecules in order to establish a monomer library, meaning the amino acid building blocks they're using in order to synthesize those peptides. And we've ended up finally with a set of around 400 different amino acid building blocks. And in addition, about 200 chemical modifications that may sit as decorations on these building blocks. And then with the help of our conversion engine, going from the chemical structure, looking at which combination of building blocks in the library actually makes up the chemical graph, generates the corresponding correct sequences based on the actual information of the drawing, getting rid of some of the inaccuracies of missing stereocenters and so on and so forth. Finally, they even used the reverse way as a kind of consolidation step and said, out of the sequence that we've generated, we now produce, based on the standardized building blocks, a clean chemical representation that will forward on into the chemical registration system they're using. So they have used these tools largely for data consolidation, data quality improvement. A second case is something that is, I would consider something like an internal experiment. You will hear just right after me a presentation about Marvin Life, a design tool for small molecules, essentially. We have looked at it and said, what if we took out the kind of chemical components out of this tool and replaced them with what we have in the biologic space? The result of that is what you're seeing here, but I don't think this is the end of the story, because I think we have just learned what we need to improve in order to bring this to a real production tool. But essentially it tells you that whenever you're looking at the sequence space, the BioToolkit offers you a couple of flavors of information that you can present in the context of your current design project. And then you can use comparisons like a sequence alignment in order to see how different have you deviated from your original idea. And then pretty much go down the roads of refining your ideas, as is going to be presented just after my presentation. The last part is something that comes from the angle of where people are usually capturing their day-to-day activities within an electronic lab notebook. Here we are working especially close at this moment with IDBS. We currently have 3 customers here in the United States that are using the IDBS eWorkbook in combination with our Biomolecule Toolkit and BioEddie for capturing of biological entities right away from the experiment description. BioEddie is essentially the default sketcher for chemically modified sequences, and it's also connected to the toolkit for registering these kind of entities in a central repository. And this is the current state that we're at. It covers essentially the kind of documentation aspects and registration aspects of these modalities. And further down the road, we're now working on establishing ELN-wide search capabilities that lets you kind of distill the information that anybody has generated within your laboratories in terms of specific context that you're interested in. This is just a brief outline of where we are going. A couple of things I have already highlighted, especially because the IDBS eWorkbook is a kind of SaaS-delivered solution. We are at the moment making a couple of adjustments in terms of being able to more easier deploy our toolkits in combination with their eWorkbook suite. We have released very lately a Docker image, easing deployment in general, also for other customers. We have to work a little on authorization, meaning at the moment it's on a toolkit level. Everybody can do everything. But then again, if you go into environments where people are responsible for maintaining the monomer library, that's a very important aspect. Other people may be responsible for registering the modalities, so this is something we'd need to take care of. And for the second half of the year, this is something that I'm going to focus on in my talk tomorrow on compound registration. We're looking at the ability of combining what we have in a very well-established small molecule registration system towards becoming agnostic in the sense of whatever you throw at your registration system, whether that be a biologic, whether that be a small molecule, or anything hybrid in between, don't care about where you're submitting this to, because there's going to be one single endpoint that's going to pick it up, understand what you want to register, and then guide its registration to the according specialty storage or registration engine. With that, I'd like to conclude my little talk for today. I hope to see you again tomorrow for the compound registration bits.
So for the search through cartridge, is it combined? The biomolecule search is combined with the chemical cartridge, or it's a separate?
It currently is a completely separate application, and we don't even have cartridge support at this very moment.